Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you all for being here this evening, and it's a great honor for the mosque to be welcoming Dr. Ingrid Mattson. Many of you will already be familiar with her amazing book on the Quran, the story of the Quran. If you haven't seen it, I advise you to get hold of a copy. It's a wonderful way into some of the outward but also the inward mysteries, I think, of Allah's book. Dr. Mattson is from Canada and is currently a professor of Islamic Studies at Huron University, which is not far from Toronto. She has also been the president of the Islamic Society of North America and is generally very much recognized and respected, not just as an academic and as a professor, but as an activist in the North American Muslim scene.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. It is really such a joy to be back in Cambridge. It is just such an honor to be here with you this evening in the beautiful Cambridge Central Mosque. I came here 4 years ago and saw while it was still being built, and then came back and saw when it was further along in the building, and I've been watching online the broadcasts, and as people across the world have. It's a beautiful contribution to our religion, to a sense of community, sense of beauty and purpose in today's world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of those who worked so hard to build this, to contribute to this, and who continue to sustain this wonderful, beautiful place of worship and reflection and community. May Allah protect this place and protect this community and all the people, and make this a wonderful, brilliant light to bring many others to a sense of purpose and peace that's so needed in our world today. This feeling that we have here in a place of such beauty and spaciousness and community, this feeling of peace and hope and purpose is something that is not felt by so many people in our world today. And every generation feels like their time is especially troubled. This is just typical of human nature. It has something to do with the fact that all of us, because of our developmental stages, always think that the good old days were always better than the one we're in now. And it has something to do with how we feel when we're closer to that fitrah that we have when we're born, when we're so connected. You know, as babies, when we come in this world, we don't even realize that we're separate beings from our mother and from the rest of the world. And that's why a baby is just suddenly a baby who's just moving around naturally. Their hand will pass in their face and like, whoa, what is that? And it takes time for them to realize that that is actually them. So we grow up and we come into our capacities. We grow into our capacities, physical and intellectual and emotional and social. But we also come into this sense that we are separate. We're separate from that origin, we're separate from each other. And as we grow and come into strength, God willing and hopefully with good nurturing and an environment and people around us who support us, but not everyone has that, there also enters those factors that drive us away from each other and that make us forget that we were ever originally connected. Not only connected to our physical origin, our mother, but connected to that eternal and divine source of being. So we're born with that feeling, and the rest of our life we are searching for that return to that feeling of unity and peace and being home, constantly looking for home and feeling that we want that. And so it's natural that every human being, as we grow and through different stages, will feel more and more that somehow we were a little more connected and felt a little more at one and true to ourselves before. But this is what our faith is about, and this is what our teachings are about, and this is why the Quran, the word of Allah that Allah sent us, is a reminder of who we are, originally who we are fundamentally, our true selves as individuals and as creations of Allah in this world. And so we come back again and again into this. But we feel, if this is the case, what is it about the world today that makes us feel that it's so much more difficult to return to that sense of connection and to return to that sense of community? It's in ourselves, but it's also in others, and we're searching for that. And even a beautiful place like this, without the people, it can be very difficult. And so we work on the space, but we also work on the spaces among us as we come together. And this is my topic today, and this is why I wanted to speak about pastoral care and about the pastoral presence of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so many things. If we read, for example, Shaykh Ibn Ashur, a great scholar of Islamic thought of the 20th century, in his book Maqasid al-Sharia, he goes on in one of the chapters enumerating the many capacities of the Blessed Prophet, of the different roles that he served in the community. So, for example, as the political leader, as the legislator, as the judge, as the teacher, as the one who gives advice, and many, many other capacities. And even the ones that are enumerated there are limited. And when we reflect on those different capacities or roles, then we can look at Islamic civilization and Muslim communities over time, and we see how different disciplines within Islamic civilization were formed to study, reflect on, and implement those forms of knowledge or those forms of authority and power. So, for example, teaching becomes a specialty of certain kinds of people, and a discipline develops in different schools of thought. Judging becomes its own discipline, and the very good teacher might not be a very good judge. You might need a very different kind of character, personality, but also the way that the judge interacts with people is different from the way that a teacher interacts with their students. So the miracle of the formation and guidance of the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that, and this is why we look to him as a unique person in human history, is that he had within himself the ability, and Allah formed him and shaped him and made him capable of serving all of those roles. It's really important for each one of us to reflect on who we are, what we might be able to contribute to others in the community. And sometimes people are misplaced. They may be a very sincere and a good person, but they're in the wrong role. And so other people don't benefit from them, and they don't benefit from that either. And so that's why it's important that we know each other, we give good advice to each other, that parents truly understand who their children are and not try to direct them into the wrong field. So this is an important aspect of human life. But one of the things that Muhammad ibn Ashur does not explicitly state is that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a shepherd to his community. although it's implied in many of his other roles. And this is what we mean by pastoral. If I say, what does it mean to give pastoral care or to have a pastoral presence? So this is the image of the shepherd who is out in the field caring for a group of a flock of sheep as a group and as individuals. Now, this may sound to some people dehumanizing. This is not what we mean. We don't mean that the pastor or the one who is offering pastoral care is of a different species from the people they're caring for. This is a metaphor. So what does the metaphor signify? It signifies that the role of this person, the one who is has this pastoral presence, is to be paying attention to the group as a whole, the dynamics as a whole, the fact that this group can move around and the individuals can shift their position relative to others, but that they stay together essentially as a flock, right? And that there are dangers to this flock that are both external and along the way, to pay attention to those dangers. But the one who is the shepherd does not then, as the shepherd is guarding the flock and they see a danger, it's not about shouting. Shouting would frighten all of them and they just run away. It's about very gently nudging, moving them along to keep them safe, yet without restricting their movements. Think about factory farming in the world today, how you have these animals who are just, each one of them enclosed in this very artificial space and tied up, unable to move on their own, stalled in this tiny little area and then force-fed, one particular kind of food just to make them fat. What's the difference of this flock that's out in the elements and in nature, actually able, each one of them, to graze on the food that is appealing to them, to graze as they like, as much as they like, and in a very natural way, develop their own, to grow into themselves in a way that is interactive with each other, in the landscape, and but still in a united way as one group, as one community, you could say. And so this is the role of the one who is shepherding a community. The one who is shepherding a community should be looking at them as a group. Each one, if one becomes injured, if one becomes ill, giving special attention to that one that needs special attention, while keeping an eye on the group as well. But really having a understanding that they know by nature what they need to do, which is to walk around and to graze and to drink when they need to and interact. So not being too directive, but caring, watching for dangers and keeping them together. So this is the metaphor or the image of the one who is shepherding a community. And this is one of the beautiful roles that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam played. And I will say that this is a role that is very much needed today, and unlike many other roles, so the role of the political leader, the judge, the legislator, most of us will never play those roles in the Muslim community. Very often we won't have anyone who will play that role because our community is in a completely different context, where the political structure or the judicial structure or the legislative structure is mostly out of our control. I mean, we're part of the society, but we're not really directing those aspects of the society that we're in. But the role of shepherding is always present. The role of shepherding is always urgent and needed, and the role of shepherding is in fact something that is so intrinsic to Islam and to what each one of us needs to do. So unlike a role like judging or political leader, which is only suitable to certain kinds of people, the role of the shepherd is suitable to every single human being. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that every one of you is a shepherd and is responsible for his flock. The leader of a people is a guardian and is responsible for his subjects. A man is the guardian of his family and he is responsible for them. A woman is the guardian of her husband's home and his children, and she is responsible for them. The servant of a man is a guardian of the property of his master, and he is responsible for it. No doubt every one of you is a shepherd and is responsible for his flock. Now, this hadith gives us again another, let's say, a necessary or a frequent series of roles that is not comprehensive of the roles that human beings can occupy, but gives us a sense of a deep understanding that this is intrinsic to being a Muslim, that shepherding is intrinsic to being a Muslim. So for example, if you are a man and you don't have children, or you are a man and are not married, there still is a role for shepherding for you. And if you're a woman who is not married, who does not have children, there still is a role of shepherding for you. Why? Because each one of us in society will find ourselves. There is, I'm sure, almost no one who isn't in a situation where they are capable of and really should feel a sense of deep compassion for others that leads to the sense of responsibility. I should offer care to this person. Think about siblings within a family. Of course, in this hadith, the saying of the Prophet Muhammad doesn't talk about the relationship of some siblings to the others. But if we look at those who are really living a natural life, who are living according to their fitrah in a good environment, we will see very naturally that the older siblings in the family will be shepherding the younger ones. They'll be watching out for them. They'll be taking care of them. No one even has to tell them. Maybe they have to be reminded sometimes, but it's a very natural thing. And this translates into other environments in our community. So for example, there have been studies of the difference between a traditional Islamic pedagogy for children and a sort of modern state pedagogy in state-run schools in Muslim countries. There have been a number of studies that have looked across societies. And one thing that they found that's very, very interesting is that the way that modern schools are set up is a model of competition. So children are all given the exact same curriculum. They're given the same set of exams. Some people do well on the exams, some pass, some fail. They all have to take them at the same time. And so the students develop, with respect to each other, the sense of competition. It leads to a great deal of hostility. In fact, hostility that they're socialized into over time, and the idea that success means dominating over the others. The traditional Islamic pedagogy instead is that everyone aspires to master a certain amount of content, but at their own time. So there's no artificial deadline. There's not one day when everyone takes a test. A person takes a test, a child, a boy or a girl, takes the test when they are ready, when they've come to the point of mastering or understanding that content, when they're ready for it. And what they've found in these schools is that very naturally, What this leads to is that the students who are a little bit ahead will use their extra time to turn to the ones who are a little behind and give them help. And at each stage, there's this form of turning, right? Turning to the one who is in need, turning to the one who needs help, and helping them to bring you along. And in this way, if you think of the group, no one is left behind. No one is straggling behind. And if there is a straggler, everyone is turning back and trying to help them. So it creates a sense of cohesion. So this pastoral presence is something that each of us should aspire to. What does it entail, and how do we see it exemplified in the presence of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Pastoral presence requires attention, and this is something that we all lack greatly in our time today. We are in our heads, we are busy, we are, preoccupied, and it becomes very difficult to pay attention even to the tasks we're doing, much less to other people. What the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us and modeled for us is that when someone comes to you with a question, someone approaches you, your body moves in response to their body. They come to you and you turn to them, to meet them. No, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he never talked to someone over his shoulder, right? So I'm facing this way and someone's here and someone comes, talks to me. No one was ever talked to from the side. He would always turn his whole blessed body to them, meeting them, right? And this is, I'm giving you attention. I see you, I'm here for you, I'm present for you. He would give his whole face, his beautiful blessed face, and he would stay with them if it was appropriate. He might hold their hand, and he would stay with them, present with them, not only listening, but showing he's listening through this embodiment. And pastoral presence has so much to do with our whole selves, paying attention to our whole selves and not just living sort of in our distracted heads, but giving his whole self to the person. So they felt this. And this is not only to be able to make people feel that they have dignity, that they matter, that we care, but it's also being able to see what is happening. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "The believer is a mirror to the believer." Now, if someone is talking to me and I'm talking to them, if we're really paying attention, then if I see in that person's face some shock, say they're not very expressive, say they're a very unexpressive person, say they're very English, who just has that, right? But if you're paying attention, you'll notice even a slight furrowing of the brow, right? Oh, what I've said has upset them. Or you'll see a glance away. You'll say, oh, what I've said has confused them or troubled them. Or you will see in their face that they're starting to cheer up. You'll see that if you're smiling at them, now they're smiling back at you. So by being present, right, facing that person, and this can be done also between men and women in an appropriate way. Obviously, you're not just staring each other's eyes, but there's an attention that's being given there with an appropriate amount of care and attention to the distance. But you can see really how your words are affecting them, but as importantly, if you are the one who is trying to offer care to the one in need of care, you can read their face. And you can read their body language. Because when people come to us, very often they're ashamed, or they're embarrassed, or they're shy to say what's really troubling them. And if we just listen to their words, and we don't pay attention to their whole presence, we're going to miss what they really are here for. They need to be able to feel that you are ready to hear what they have to say. I think anyone here who is a parent and has tried to talk to their child about a difficult subject will understand this dynamic. How you know your child. You know when your child something's going on, something's troubling them. They don't feel well. Why is that? How do we know that even if they don't say something? It's because of paying attention to them. We care enough to pay attention. We care enough to watch them for a little while and then be able to try to open that space for them to come. Now, how does that happen? And here is where the pastoral presence, again, is different than the one who is simply leading or directing or reminding. And all of those are roles that need to be played at different times, right? To give a lesson, to correct someone, all of those things. But most of us are not capable of doing that. We don't have the authority, we don't have the position. Unfortunately, many of us feel that our role is to go in and be the muhtasib, the person who's correcting others, even though we don't have any authority. We don't even know these person who we're approaching, telling them do this or that. Most of us shouldn't be doing that, not in general with people, but all of us can and should be able to be open to listening and to be that presence where a believer sees reflected in our reaction to them that they have dignity, that they have purpose, that they matter. Whoever they are, that they have the hurma of the believer, the sacred inviolability. There's a deep sacrality in the creation of the human being, every human being, not just a believer. This is the beauty and the dignity and purpose that Allah created every human being with, created us on this fitrah, which is a spiritual foundation. It's like our spiritual skeleton. We've been created in this way. This is our form. And sometimes we become deformed. We're a little bit, a little bit disabled, but we can return to that original form with some help. So how do we do that? And here we see the beautiful sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that is this pastoral presence that is also the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also reveals Allah's compassion and mercy to us. If we think about the different ways of interacting with the Quran or the messages that Allah gives us through His Word, of course there are rules, there are commands, there are instructions, there are narratives, there are role models, and all of these things help us to orient ourselves in the world, to remind us, to instruct us and guide us. Then, of course, there's the beauty of the Quran and its recitation, how it sounds, how the sound of the Quran, the recitation of the Quran, when it's done beautifully, is in itself a message, to the point that even those who have no idea what's being said are so moved by the Quranic recitation, moved and drawn to it. The form is a message in itself. But there's something else when we reflect very deeply on the Quran and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to reveal certain ayat, certain passages when something was happening in the community. People were troubled. There was some conflict. There was a question. And very often, the revelation came in the midst of especially those who were marginalized in the community, those who really didn't have much of a voice, those who were struggling. In that situation, Allah revealed something. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us is responsiveness, is that being responsive is a divine way of being. And then the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam embodied that responsiveness as well. How many times did people come to the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they complained about something, or they expressed in an inappropriate way some anger or displeasure? And how many times when that happened did the Blessed Prophet tell those people, how dare you say that? How can you say that to me? How can you speak that way to me? Never. Never. The companions, because they loved the Blessed Prophet, sometimes they jumped in and they say, don't speak that way. Or how can you say that? Or don't do that. They were upset. But the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never was, because he was able to see in those people who came to them their pain, their trauma, why they were agitated, the reason behind their agitation. And so he didn't have this reaction. There's a difference between reaction and responding. So he never reacted to them, but he responded to them. And this is what we all need today. We're extremely reactive. And of course it takes practice, it takes discipline, it takes self-control, and it takes deep compassion when we face others in the midst of our own lives, when each of us are facing our own trials and our own troubles. Right? To be able to extend patience and compassion to others when we feel agitated, when we feel that, so many things are happening to us and our family, and we have so many worries. So we're not in a state of preparation for that. We're not prepared to receive that. And so we are reactive. We take this as just another problem, as another irritation. But the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, because of who he was, did not have that, even though he had more personal problems, more personal tragedies than anyone. And this is not to say that we should forget our troubles or we shouldn't be changed by them. No, we're not. He is Khatam an-Nabiyyin. We are not. We're not prophets. We're people. But we're striving for that model, right? But here is one who, lost his father before he was born, lost his mother when he was young. In the midst of the revelation, saw those near and dear to him tortured, some to death, saw his beloved wife, his most cherished companion, suffering because of a blockade and then dying. Sayyidina Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her. Every single one of the Blessed Prophet's children died before he did, except for one. Every one of his children, some in infancy and some as adults. All of these things were going on in his personal life, in addition to the attacks, the military attacks on the community, the hardship, the personal attacks, all of these things. Again, no one of us could handle that, and that's the difference between we ordinary people and being a prophet. But it's also why we need each other. It's why we, in particular, need each other in a way that that makes it impossible to live truly without that care. Because none of us could handle that the way he could, because we're not prophets, we're not messengers. But we do have each other, and that is why we need to be present for each other, or strive to be present for each other in the way that he modeled for us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what is that? What's an example of this? If we think of the example of Khawla bint Tha'laba, and Shaykh Abdal Hakim kindly mentioned my book, and I begin my book actually with this story, this episode, because to me it's such it really lays the foundation for what we should understand about our relationship with Allah's word in many ways. Here she is, a woman who, from what we know, was a good wife with a sometimes difficult husband, raising his children, being there. And in a moment of anger, he says a very hurtful thing to her, very hurtful. Not only hurtful, but in the Jahili context, actually has a legislative effect, right? Which is to say the words of dhihar, anti ilayya kadhahri ummi, means now she is a taboo woman, meaning she is no longer capable of being my wife because she is like my mother, right? Like the backside of my mother. It's a very vulgar expression. Yet she's not divorced. So here she is, kalmu'allaqa, hanging between being married. She's not divorced, she's not married. After this lifetime of a relationship, now here she is in this terrible state. Yet, then she forgives him. She knows him, and she forgives him. And then, but the problem is, the legislative action of these words before Islam had not been invalidated yet. And so she comes to the Blessed Prophet ﷺ and explains the situation to him. And the Blessed Prophet says, well, I haven't received any instruction from Allah on this yet. And then she said, oh, well, if you can't do anything, then I'll take my complaint to God. And the way the story, why is she called al-mujadila? There's a lot of sort of euphemisms that are used to translate this, but mujadila, she's really like the argumentative woman, or the woman who's arguing with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And she says this, and then the next day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the passage relating to that, which is the beginning of Surah Al-Mujadila, and abrogating, making this kind of statement null and void. No longer does it have any legislative effect. Someone says this, it does not, it has no effect on the woman anymore, plus it is sinful to do it. And so the person who states this needs to repent and engage in some action of kafara. So what is the pastoral part of this? The pastoral part of it is, here's a woman who is, first of all, I want to really honor the fact that she forgave her husband before any of this happened. It was very hurtful, but later he regretted what he said. And so from that regret, we understand that he, said to her, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said this. I don't know the exact words, but this is implied in the way the story is told. And she accepted his regret and forgave him. So this is beautiful. And this is part of her knowing her husband as well. And this means that she is paying attention, and she's also doing her part in some way, we could say, of really being a shepherd to her husband in this case. But when she goes to the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though she is speaking to him in an argumentative way, right? She's arguing with him about this situation, that the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never berated her for how she was speaking, never said, well, this is just how it is, just accept it. But he let her speak, and he let her express the pain that she felt and express what she hoped for, and also allowed her the space for her own realization. And this is a beautiful aspect of offering pastoral care, is actually giving that moment where you don't just fill the space and keep talking, but waiting, saying, I have not received anything about this yet. And then she has the time to think and find within herself, return back to her own resource, which is her faith, and absolute faith and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is beautiful. This is why she's such a beautiful role model as well. She doesn't know what's going to happen, but she has confidence in Allah. She has confidence in God. And she is confident that if this is wrong, that this is going to change. One way or another, something is going to happen and this is going to change. But it's the Blessed Prophet ﷺ who allows her to have that realization in his presence. And this is what's a little bit different also from offering pastoral care or a pastoral presence and just teaching someone something. To be a pastor is really to have confidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created each one of us with this innate capacity at the foundation to return to Allah, to really connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just about tawheed. It's not just about I make my prayers to Allah rather than necessarily needing to go through someone else. It's not just about this doctrine, but it's really a sense that although we're all different, and although we may have wandered off the path or made mistakes or veered, that there is something at the foundation of who we are as human beings that is never lost and we can always return to. With care, with compassion, with knowledge, and with community, people can find something within themselves, the realization, yes, I know. I can ask God. I'll pray to God, and my answer will come. Of course, very often it doesn't come the next day, and we're not in a period of revelation, but there's also that ability, and this is beautiful pastoral presence of the Blessed Prophet ﷺ, that he didn't abandon her, even though he wasn't able to relate to her at that time, revelation. Right? At that point, there was no message yet that had come. It would come soon. But there is continuing to be in the presence of the person, and she stayed by their door. She stayed by his home all evening. And he didn't tell her to go away or go home or something like this. So it's saying, I will be with you even if I right now don't have the answer. I can't solve your problem right now. I can't give you a solution now. And I think for many of us it makes us very nervous, or we feel that we can't say that because as Muslims we're supposed to have a solution to everything. We're supposed to be able to give an answer to everything, and so sometimes we jump in inappropriately. Sometimes we're at a point where we don't see right now a way out for someone. So very often our reaction is that either we just run away from that. It makes us afraid. So we run away from that and leave them to continue to be not only struggling with a problem, but struggling with it alone. Or we somehow turn the blame on them and try to make it their problem. Or we give them, be patient. Of course, patience is good, but in a way, it's a kind of, I'm going to say, like, cheap spiritual advice in a way where we're just feeling we want to discharge our duty. Oh, I've done what I can, I've told them to be patient. Right? It's not really what they need. They know about patience. What they feel is lonely, they feel sad, they feel alone in the struggle. And so what is so beautiful about the Blessed Prophet ﷺ is that he never abandoned the people or just laid the burden on them when they were struggling. When his beautiful blessed companions, Sayyidina Yasir and Sumayya and their son Ammar, were being tortured and suffering, and this is in the Meccan period when the Blessed Prophet had no political power. He hadn't been given permission by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to intervene in a situation. He had no permission at that point. He didn't have the authority in the city, and Allah hadn't given him permission to intervene in that way. But he didn't abandon them. He prayed for them and with them, even as they were suffering. And then, of course, when Ammar, a young person traumatized by this situation, came weeping to the Blessed Prophet, saying that he had been destroyed because out of the intense torture and trauma, he had done whatever the Quraysh wanted him to say. And the Blessed Prophet ﷺ said, if they come to you again, say the same thing. Right? He didn't say, how can you say that? He said, if they come to you again, say the same thing. Why? Because he was a young man. He was not capable at that point in his development to be able to endure it in the way that his parents did and were martyred at that time. He looked at him in his situation, his stage of development, his age, what he had gone through. And this is such an important part of the pastoral presence, is to be able to assess this person in this place at this time. What do they need to be able to spiritually survive? Because if you push people into a situation that they're not capable of surviving, what could be lost is more than their life. It actually they could be pushed into despair or giving up. And so, really, I guess I would say that there are so many lessons that we can find in the example of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I think that very often we fear that we're incapacitated in our time. There's so much that we can't do. We're in this social, political, economic, structural system that is so destructive, so corrupt. global, I mean, how much can we really affect change? And it makes us feel incapacitated. It makes us feel purposeless sometimes. But in the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. You know, we are insan, we are human beings, the social beings. To be social is our nature. To be in community and to establish community is at our most foundational instruction. Before anything else, it's to come together as a community. And that means that we are people who are trying to come together and have this sense that we belong. We belong not just to this faith, and not only that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us, but that we do have those who are around us, who we are part of. We are part of something greater, which is community. And how often do we hear people say, where is the community? Where is the community? Right? And we try to create different programs and all sorts of things, and there's so many good initiatives that are being done. But you don't need funding. You actually don't need funding to create community. You don't need a lot of expertise and training. You don't need a lot of knowledge to create community. Community is about facing those who are in front of you, turning to those who are alongside. And as you turn, have you ever been in a group and you're standing and there's someone to the side, and so first, because they're on the margin, first you face them, and as you're talking, you're kind of shuffling back to the side, to the group where everyone else is, and they kind of are shuffling along with you, and suddenly, you know, after a while, this person who was on the margin has now found themselves, now they're part of the group again. So this is something that each one of us can do, no matter what age we are, no matter what skills we have, no matter what kind of setting we have. It takes nothing but being able to care enough and to understand that our fundamental obligation in this life, in this dunya, as human beings who are put in community is, as we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to do that in the presence of others and being able to reflect like a mirror this beautiful compassion that is the essence of our religion. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent as rahmatan lil alamin. I was just talking to Sister Humaira before, and talking about the fact that, you know, we often hear in our instruction about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the majestic names and the beautiful names. And they aren't necessarily masculine or feminine, but sometimes there's a kind of, you know, we sort of think of them sometimes in this way as the majestic and the beautiful. So they aren't gendered at all. We know Allah isn't gendered, but there's a kind of, in human beings, we reflect, you know, each one of us reflects some of those qualities, and we try to bring more balance in us. But this is true in the Blessed Prophet Muhammad. He had majesty and he had beauty. Right? He reflected that majesty and he reflected that beauty. But his mission, his primary mission, what Allah tells us is his primary mission sent is rahmatan lil alamin. You know, the true essence of our faith is this compassion reflected among each other. And there is no one who is incapable of serving as that mirror to another. And if we did this one thing, and it requires for us to, each one of us, to work a little bit on ourselves so that we're prepared for that, right? we need to have some time before we enter our house, before we enter the masjid, before we enter in the presence of others, even if it is only a 30-second kind of cleansing. Okay, now I am going to be in the presence of others. Let me just try to divest myself of my worries, of my, ruminations, and realize that now, as I'm entering the company of others, I need to be available to be present for them. If we did that, I believe that we would find tremendous transformation. And we would no longer have to say, where is community? Because we would be manifesting it within ourselves in the imitation of the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Something that will have occurred to many of the very good-hearted people who serve in this mosque and recognize the immensity of the need that is out there in our fragmenting society, full of single parents, full of refugees, full of people who are damaged, full of lonely people, that one has to know one's own limits, that a flock has to have certain natural dimensions, and sometimes in the goodness of people's hearts they take on a little bit too much, and this can overburden them. Have you got any rule of thumb that indicates how we should know when to stop and to spend a little bit more time with the people we already have and with ourselves?
Thank you. That's such a wonderful observation, and it's so true. How often we step over the people who are in need in order to rush off to do something else, right? And certainly we know that in our religion that we have obligations that are individual to us, fard kifaya. I mean, we have to take care of our own individual obligations, and then we can, in addition, contribute to some of the collective or communal obligations, but not all of them. And there's no point in, when there is a communal obligation, to take care of those who have no one, who naturally would care for them. What it means is some of us have to do it, and as long as some of us do it, that ends the obligation for the rest of us. But doing it is not just something that's superficial. It should be when we do something, we should do it with ihsan. We should take it seriously. We should undertake it knowing that I'm actually going to join with others to address this issue. But we can't abandon our those whom we individually are obligated to serve. And sometimes I think what happens is there is good-heartedness, but there's two things that happens here. Sometimes it's easier to deal with strangers than with our own family and with our own community, right? Because people can be exhausting, and sometimes you think, wow, I have this one family member or I have this one student who's just taking all of my time. And whereas if we go off and do something else, we feel, we can do so much more. But that really, it's a way to shun, it's a way to rationalize to ourselves. We have to really, and this is where muhasabah needs to happen, and we really need to reflect, why am I trying to run away from this to that? I need to really think about what is compelling me to try to serve others and not to serve those who are close to me, who I really need to. So there is something within ourselves. The other part of it is, to some extent, it's a lack of trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we think that we are the only ones who can do something, or we're the only ones who can, we have to do it because no one else will. And it may be at first because we have been organizing everyone and directing everyone and whatever, that for a little while, because we've been taking up that space, maybe there is no one for a little while. But if we are holding that space, there's no how is anyone else going to step up? And what I've found every time that I have been involved in a position of leadership or support or service is that if I needed to draw back, or I felt it was time to draw back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought someone who I never would have thought was available, or I didn't even know about, or so this deen, this religion and service, it's Allah's deen, and these are Allah's people, and so we need to have faith both that Allah will create the people and guide the people who are needed, and also to have a little bit of humility and realize that, you know, maybe even the way that we were serving is not very helpful. You know, maybe if we draw back and give due attention to the obligations that we're ignoring, maybe someone else will come in and do it better. And I've seen that again and again and again. And so but it really comes back to the heart and honesty with ourselves. And unless we spend the time in self-purification and really asking God to guide us, it's very easy to be self-deceptive and to see ourselves as in some kind of heroic narrative, everyone in need of us. And it's a struggle I think we all face. You know, may Allah guide us and help us in this.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah, and we look forward to your next visit soon, inshallah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your attention. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad.